James is still talking about Mammoth, so I'll let him do that and
And
do that.
and about other things. The end of the world, or almost. We've had many different episodes where people, even during the time where people have existed in this world, where it would have looked as though the world ended. The thing to understand, I suppose, is people had very limited horizons way back when. So the people who experienced the Noachian flood, which would have been the predecessor really of the, from what I can tell, of the Sumerian flood. Looks as though the people who wrote the Bible adopted it and partially adapted. And other flood myths around the world get it clear. There might be some spread from one place to another, but they weren't spread by missionaries. Okay? They weren't spread by missionaries during the colonial era. Like you'll find similarities in the myths, so-called myths, whatever, legends, in the New World, even from North America to South America. But they don't seem that similar to related myths. And I'm not kidding you when I say related myths. So, here are some of the myths that I've run across. These are natives of the Andes. The flood rose high, the waters rose high, and the people ran to the mountains. And the only thing that saved them was the mountains rose higher than the waves. That's different from the Bible story. And it's key, Some people got on rafts. I think it's plural. Not the one big thing, and I don't know if there's any mention of animals being rescued, as there is in the Noah story. There are stories of I don't know how true it is, I don't know. The drops of the flood, I think this is from the New World again, were so big when they were coming down they killed babies. The water from the flood was boiling hot. Details that just aren't in the Bible, and they might be made up. There might be a kernel of truth then. It might be pretty close to the truth. In the younger Dryas, the new kids on the block, the ones that one geologist at least that has had the courage to say in the public, I was around when the idea of continental rift was taking over academia. And he mentioned that one of his professors in the 70s down at the University of Toronto still didn't accept continental rift. I think that would have been the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Academics have a hard time going against the flow. They really do. And it's partly a nature of their institutions. I was talking to one physicist a while back. He was following what I was saying. And he knew that I'd come up with an alternative explanation for a particular part of physics. And at the end of it all, it took about 45 minutes. I could have gone on. Started talking about other things too. But he'd been very patient. And what he said is I could follow up what you're doing, but I'd lose my job. And I didn't say yes. I didn't say yeah. I just said yep. Just shut my mouth right away. Yep. Because I've been following the Velikovsky thing and other controversies and stuff like that for decades now. I first read Velikovsky back in '74. So that was almost exactly 50 years ago. It would have been the summer of '74. And I was interested. And I really started to look at it more closely. In '84, what happened in intervening time? 1980, a guy called Alvarez and I believe his son discovered a radiation-rich layer, a place called Gubbio, Italy. I mentioned it before. I'm going to keep mentioning it because it's vital. 1980, see, it's intervening time. And all of a sudden, they were confronted, geologists were, with the idea of catastrophism. Now, they were comfortable with it, most of them, because that radiation-rich layer comes at the end of the Cretaceous, the end of the dinosaurs. The fact is, what brought on that radiation, a meteorite impact, they think it is. I suspect it was several impacts brought in by, as a comet. And they've discovered one, but, kind of on the borderline, as it were, the shoreline of the Yucatan with the Gulf of Mexico. But, the Earth's surface, continental surface, is 30% of the total Earth's surface. 70% that they'll never be able to, like the ocean bottoms are really young by comparison with the continental bottoms. I don't think they'll ever find any other thing from the Cretaceous. But I'm sure they felt kind of relieved. Oh yeah, we can go with this because, it's so long ago. We're not in danger. We still live like almost in the best of all possible worlds. The sort of thing dreamed up by Leibniz. A pretty good mathematician, not a very good philosopher. Leibniz, German. So now what's happening? This is more than 40 years later, and some old fogies have died. Enough so it looks as though finally catastrophism is going to get down to where mankind accepted for when mankind was around. So maybe 10,000 years ago. I'm not exactly sure when they date the Younger Dryas. Something like that. 8,000 BC, somewhere around there. But there would be extreme discomfort associating that with a flood. Because there's hangover from the Enlightenment. I believe in Enlightenment, but not the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment got lots of things wrong. Gibbon, for example, preferred, it seems, Islam to Christianity. I thought Christianity is what made the Western Europe barbaric. And he didn't do his homework. The Romans actually were barbarians by comparison with the Greeks. It wasn't just the Muslims that barbarized Egypt, Mesopotamia, Northern Africa. I mean, you look at the ruins that were put up by the Romans in Northern Africa, it's stunning. Leptis Magna, check it out. Leptis Magna, Leptis. That should be enough for you to get it on Wiki, and then you'll be able to get further sorts of things. I think there's a theater there, all this sort of stuff. I presume it's desert now. And Tunisia, and so on and so forth. You look at Greece, actually, and how backward it became after the Muslims took it over. So absolutely shameful, and that's just in 600 years. But yeah, so Gibbon was part of that Enlightenment. He was anti-Christian. I'm not pro-Christian. I just look at things objectively, and I say, like it and Buddhism are kind of tied for the two major religions that are the most enlightened in another sense, in the long run. I'm not that thrilled about the Catholic Church. Protestantism in the long run has proven to be much more like the original Christianity dreamed up by Jesus and his apostles. Much more. Still got its problems. Hence, me not being a Christian. And Buddhism was better, like it's kind of like a reformed religion by comparison with Hinduism. And even by comparison with Jainism. Buddha apparently thought of his religion as being the middle way between things like Jainism and Hinduism. Kind of relatively rational. And Buddhism hit China, and a lot more enlightened than Confucianism. Confucianism is actually pretty secular by comparison with many religions, Hinduism, Christianity. But it's got this problem of basically kowtowing to your superiors. So that means kids to their parents, wife to the husband to the village chief or whatever, village chief to the provincial chief, and the provincial chief to the emperor. And you'll get people saying, what happened in China? They were so far ahead of the West, and then, yeah, it's Confucianism. Like when you look at when China was maybe at its most advanced by comparison with other places, it's Tang Dynasty. But for the first 2/3 or so, or maybe even more of that dynasty, the prevailing religion seemed to have been Buddhism. Religious beliefs, your belief systems in general, make a difference in how people live, how well off they are. They just do. You're a commie, and be prepared for misery. Be prepared to be slaughtered by the people who you helped put in power. That's what happened to the socialist revolutionaries in Russia, and the social democrats, the ones that didn't escape. Some did. The leader of the Mensheviks did. He lived to quite a ripe old age. I think it was in the United States. Another Menshevik who was very bloodthirsty, a guy called Trotsky, he didn't make it. I think he was taken out by a pickaxe, wielded sometime around 1941. And that came compliments of Stalin. So, and the economy doesn't work. So that's a case of a belief system that styles itself as being very secular and all this sort of stuff. And it just doesn't work. It works so poorly. The agricultural system under the Soviets worked worse than the agricultural system under that incompetent Putin. So you'll notice that Ukraine and Russia are kind of almost like one of the breadbaskets of the world. But when I was a kid, check it out, I'm not making it up, the Russians were importing grain from places like Canada. And you'll get their apologists saying, they only have 2 famines. They always seem to have food shortages. How can you do that when you got soils and relatively conducive climates, at least in Ukraine, is some of the best soils in the world, and you're having food shortages, and you don't have a big population like places like India and China. Even now, the Russian population might be 250 million. That's less than Pakistan, less than Bangladesh. So, yeah, enlightenment. And I'll be talking more about Velikovsky, the scientific reception system. I want to make clear that I've read this stuff. I'll read anything. You know, I've read Karl Marx. I've read Mein Kampf. I've read some of Karl Marx in the original German. Haven't had that pleasure with Mein Kampf, and I hope you detected some irony in me saying pleasure. It's from the English. It's actually not that poorly written, but you know, I might get a better sense looking at it this stuff in the original German. I'll read anything, you know. I hope I have enough time to read this stuff that's really important. I'll read anything. I don't believe in censorship. So Velikovsky, where did he go wrong? Well, you know, like this guy was amazing at digging up sources. So I've talked about how he found out the same day, the same night, that Sennacherib's army is described as being wiped out. And understand, you have to go with a different scenario than to go with now. But it was Assyriologists earlier, you know, I think even in Velikovsky, was saying there he had Sennacherib had a second campaign, a very successful one in 1701, and then one in 686. And you go 686, China, what they didn't celebrate the Passover, but the exact night, they say stars fell like rain. Stars fell like rain. And the important thing is, it's not your regular meteor shower, because there's a little footnote. And maybe that isn't quite the footnote. I think that it might be the stars didn't appear that night. They weren't seen. Yeah, that's weird. Because what you'd say is they didn't appear because there was cloud cover. But then how would you see the stars falling like rain? A little bit of a problem. Unless you actually were seeing impacts and stuff like that. But there is a footnote to that about the stars not appearing at night. And the way it puts it doesn't mention anything. The footnote doesn't mention anything about cloud cover. It says the reason why the stars didn't appear was because it was bright as day. That's how close those meteorites were. And that's an indication of how many there weren't. And Sennacherib's army got thumped. I don't think anywhere near the 180 or 186,000 that's given as the number that were wiped out. I don't think there was anywhere near that number taken out, but what the heck. I mean, Sennacherib, even back then, seemed to have inflated his statistics. The 701 campaign to the southern, to the area, Negev, nowadays Negev, he's saying he took 200,000 prisoners off captive. And I mean, I don't know. I think the climate was probably similar, pretty similar then to what it is now. And the Israelis are pretty amazing when it comes to, they basically control that area. And and they're pretty amazing with what they can do with agriculture, but I don't know if they've stuffed 200,000 people in there, even now, with modern technology. So Sennacherib inflated his statistics, and that is basically a contemporary. I'm going to call it a document. It's carved in stone, literal. So how did Velikovsky get the astronomy wrong? The thing that I found in sources, Greek, Egyptian, there's the Bible, Indian, Chinese, and Mesopotamian sources. Geez, that's 6 sources spread across 3 continents, literally across Asia. Not so much spread into Europe. Greece is barely into Europe. Egypt's barely into Africa. But Asia is a big continent. It's by far the biggest. And what they all agree with the exception of China, and China is the important one actually, is that something happened way back when And it happened in the sign of Capricorn. Yeah. You have to do a little bit of finagling. Look up what a scapegoat means. And Alan Starr needs. What it stood for Capricorn. A goat. Capricorn. It's a goat. It's a goat. I think it's supposed to be a sea goat. Okay? And the important one is actually China. So there's even slightly before the beginning of their history, there's a catastrophe. And Velikovsky points it out. He says I think he says constellation of Yin, but it's not really a constellation. He wouldn't even call it that. Well, I think he does say it's a star, Yin, just a particular star. That's why it's so important. Constellations are huge, big things. I think we have something like 80, 88, maybe the number of constellations that there are keys on the piano, somewhere around there. Well, the sky is big and huge and stuff like that. 88 constellations doesn't narrow it down very much. I'm going to tell you that our constellations in the so-called scientific West were delineated, the boundaries are put up between them. 1930, not BC, 1930 AD. My dad, who died less than 2 years ago, was alive, very much alive, and he'd have a memory of that if he'd been interested in science, because he would have been about 7 years old. Okay? So that's just in the last 100 years. So I can remember when I was looking up the Yin, I was going, what? That's Aquarius. I was expecting it to be Capricorn. It's the last one I checked out. And then I'm going, I'm glad I know my constellations pretty well, at least the major ones. I mean, some of the semi-major ones. And stars within them and so on and so forth. And I'm going, hold on a second. I'll show you on a star map one of these times, but I'll introduce the idea to you. You look at it, the zodiac. Capricorn's on the zodiac, we're agreed on that, I hope. And it's below the ecliptic, which is the path that the planets and the sun take across the sky. That's why the zodiac's so important, because it's reading the aspects and stuff like that between the planets and the sun. The moon's a little bit different. It's on a slightly different plane, but they try to get the moon into it in astrology and stuff like that. But here you got Capricorn. It's a little bit below the ecliptic. Above it, way above it, is a big, long constellation and another big, long constellation. So over here, you've got Capricorn, and then Capricorn and Pisces, and in between them, Aquarius. Now, the whole idea, you see, nowadays, we don't care. 1930, we didn't care what the boundaries were. Why? Because we're not interested in harvest, planting, seasonal sort of thing. But for the ancients, pretty well anywhere, it might do to have constellations that are pretty well equal in length along the ecliptic. That makes sense? And you know, like we could say, oh, okay, Pisces is too big, maybe, or Aquarius here is too big in the middle, maybe Pisces had more. Yeah, but Pisces is big and long too. It would make more sense, Capricorn being short and Aquarius being long, that Capricorn, for most people back when, was bigger than what we define it. There's nothing sacred or sacrosanct about the way we divide the constellations up. And so, Yin, wow, Eta Aquarius. What's important about it? Well, I am telling you that basically astronomers are agreed that meteor showers are associated with comets. They've only been able to identify a few meteor showers with comets. But you know, what are the chances that Eta Aquarius, the chances are pretty small. that you'd have a star associated with a meteor shower. But yeah, the Eta Aquarids. Wow. Yeah. And some people associate with Halley's Comet. If it is associated with Halley's Comet, and if the scenario I'm laying out for you is somewhere approximating reality, Halley's Comet was way bigger, about 4,000 years ago, a little bit less. Came divided up in the Earth's gravitational field into maybe somewhere between 10 to a dozen pieces. One survived, or three really, kind of rolling around in outer space. How much time have I run out?
No, you still have 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Okay,
3 minutes.
so
So I'll wrap up this sort of stuff. Anyway, yeah. Halley's Comet was way bigger. The legend in China is called the Legend of the 10 Suns. What's that about? 10 suns? Those are 10 pieces of a comet, maybe Halley's Comet. I'm not going to stick close on it and say that's it for sure. I'm not even going to say probably, but possibly. And 10 or more pieces, and whump, all but one of those pieces hit the world. Why would they look like the sun? You know, they're really close to the world, and the sun's shining off of them. Have you seen pictures? I mean, it's not. They'd be weird suns because they have these two big tails coming off of them. One ionized tail, and one the tail left by its trail as it's going across the sky. It would look absolutely frightening. And it would be absolutely frightening each hit. Maybe not for people on the other side of the world, but people living on coastlines. The Indian Ocean got hit this time. They carbon-14 read the impact on the Indian Ocean to 2350 BC. They're off by 500 years. Why? It's because the carbon-14 readings, the raw carbon readings for that would be 1850, which is the data that I get from the Mesopotamian stuff. 1850. They adjust to satisfy the Egyptologists. They add for that era about 500 years to carbon-14 readings. 1850, not 2350. It's exactly what I didn't know about this stuff. I'd had come up with a dating system before I ran across Dallas Abbott's work. We're through?
no, you have a minute.
A minute. So, yeah, 1850. Oh, my prophetic soul, as Hamlet said. Oh, my prophetic soul. I nailed it. 1850, raw carbon readings. And if you were living on the edge of the Indian Ocean, Madagascar, the tidal waves from that thing were huge. Now, I don't know if there'd be a tidal bore coming up onto the Indus Valley. They do find flood layers there. But if there was a tidal bore on the Red Sea, you wouldn't want to be on the end of the north end of the Red Sea, unless you were the Israelites and made it across. They maybe had an hour to get across, from what I have read about tidal waves and withdrawing. They had an hour to get across. It was probably a very narrow part of the Red Sea, and it didn't work out so well for the Egyptians. According to the account,